For the last adventure on our 2023 road trip, we traveled to nearby Sharpsburg, Maryland to see the Antietam Battlefield, site of the bloodiest single day in the entire Civil War. The battle here claimed over 23,000 casualties. It was a brutal battle that ended up as a draw between the two sides, as both suffered heavy losses. Come join us on another step into Civil War history. Hello everybody. We are in Sharpsburg, Maryland, and we're here to visit the Antietam National Battlefield, another Civil War battlefield. And right now there's a lot of renovations taking place. So the typical visitor center over there is temporarily being housed over here. So yeah, we're going to be checking this place out and doing the tour and all that kind of good stuff in this beautiful, beautiful Maryland countryside. Okay. So there is a $20 fee to get into the park. And right outside Visitor Center, we already got one display of cannons. Okay, the Antietam, the open and rolling terrain benefited the artillerymen of both armies. By placing their cannons on high ground, blue and gray alike were able to effectively strike enemy troop positions at great distances. Over 500 cannon thundered across the landscape for 12 hours. The artillery was a separate specialized branch of the army that supported the infantry. Basic organizational unit of artillery was called a battery. It consisted of 4 to 6 cannons with approximately 7 to 100 men, commanded by a captain. Now, we just happened to get here in time where they're about to do a cannon demonstration, artillery demonstration, up here at the New York Monument. So before we get kicking with the tour and checking out the whole battlefield, since it's about to start, we're going to come up here and check it out. So about 15 minutes is going to get started, and they already got some period people in period clothing.
Look, it's down there.
Yep.
I hope they don't hit us with one of us.
Huh?
They're not going to hit us with one.
No, they don't fire real shells, just the powder. And here's the New York Monument, since we're standing right here. New York officers killed or mortally wounded at Antietam. And there's a cannon. Oops. And there's the cannon they're going to shoot. And that's where they would keep the supplies for the cannon. And that little thingy there. Looks like they're going to be shooting off some rifles too. And I bet you they're hot in those period costumes. Yeah, most of them back then were made of wool. Not exactly a cool material. Okay, so we're gonna wait here for the demonstration to start, and we'll be back. Gotta say something about that Maryland countryside. Just look at that. cornfields. That is beautiful. I believe those are the South Mountains right there. We couldn't have timed it any better, arriving just 15 minutes before the park's final artillery demonstration of the day. I was definitely excited. It was a very muggy yet beautiful day here in Maryland, and I was ready for another trip into the past. History definitely comes alive in a place like this. Stunning. I don't know whether that's a new visitor center or they're renovating the old one. I've never been to this place before. Still got a couple of minutes. I'm going to walk over to this monument here. It's another New York monument. The 20th Regiment of New York Volunteers. Yeah, 20th Regiment of New York Volunteers. So this is another New York monument. Casualties at the Battle of Antietam. 38 killed, 96 wounded, 11 missing. So I wonder what came first. This one, or they might be for two different regiments. Could be. Okay. We'll go back up here and wait for the demonstration.
So we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone on behalf of the National Park Service to our final firing demonstration of the weekend. We have volunteers today who will be conducting a kind of a two-part demonstration for you. So we'll start off with the infantry, including a musket firing demonstration. Then we'll fire the cannon here, and then we'll have a talk about Civil War artillery, tell you a little bit about each position on the cannon, as well as some of the ammunition that they would fire. We'll fire one final round from the cannon, and once it has been declared safe, we'll drop the ropes and invite you out to come talk to all of our volunteers, get a closer look at the guns, and ask any questions that you might have. Of course, since this is a firing demonstration, we have a couple special safety precautions for you to observe. You'll see our safety line here. Please don't cross that safety line. You'll also see safety observers at several points along the line. Please follow their instructions. They're there to keep you safe. You'll probably have realized, especially since you're seeing a cannon, that there are going to be some pretty loud noises associated with the demonstration. So if you want to, you can cover your ears before they fire. A good clue that that's coming up will be the command of ready. If you have small children, you may want to cover their ears for them. If you wear a hearing aid, you might want to turn that down. And I don't think I see anyone, but to say it just to be sure, if you have any pets with you, make sure you keep a nice tight hold on their leash. So I'm going to turn it over now to Curtis to get started with our demonstration.
All right, thank you, Olivia. Well, good afternoon and welcome to Antietam, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief background on Civil War infantry, the weapons, the training, and how they were used on the field. Now, for most of us in the 21st century, looking at typical line tactics in the American Civil War, two ranks, shoulder to shoulder, firing at each other, doesn't look really very bright to us. But one of the things you have to understand is that in 1855, just 6 years before the start of the Civil War, the primary weapon used in the United States Army was still a smoothbore musket. They only convert to rifles in 55, a rifle musket, and they're still trying to work out how they're going to adjust and change the tactics, and they're making some changes in the book. But when the American Civil War starts, you suddenly go from a standing military force of about 15,000 men to hundreds of thousands of men on each side. And so it's like, okay, we're going to stick with the tried and the true and what we know. We may do some experimentation with a couple of odd units, but we're going to continue to fight in line tactics. The big difference between a smoothbore and a rifle is the rifle, which can be loaded, it's a Mini rifle, it can be loaded as quickly as a smoothbore, but it's got an effective range of about 300 yards versus 100 yards for a smoothbore. I mean, the rounds fly farther, but keeping them under control is difficult. Now, when you're fighting in a linear formation, your men have to be well organized, well drilled, because people have got to do things the same way and at the same time for things to work effectively, including even loading a musket, which is, you know, a little more complicated than it looks. So the Army would train you, and this would be both armies in the same way, private requirement. And so one of the first basic things you were taught was what's known as load and fire in 9 times. The 9 separate steps takes you to load a rifle musket or a musket to make sure everybody does the things correctly and safely. Load 9 times, load. Brings the weapon down by his foot, reaches back with his right hand and unhooks his cartridge box. Handle cartridge. Brings up a paper cartridge that has both the black powder and the mini ball in it, or round ball of a smoothbore, and he puts it up to his teeth. Tear cartridge. He tears open the cartridge, exposing the powder, places it by the muzzle. To work in the infantry, you had to have 2 opposing teeth in the front of your mouth. Charge cartridge. Puts in the powder, forces the ball into the top, looses the ramrod in the pipes. Draw rammer, 2 motions, always the same way. Ram cartridge. This forces the cartridge into the breech of the weapon to make sure that it will work effectively and safely. Return rammer. Got to get the rammer out of the weapon, back into the pipes below the barrel, or you're not going to be shooting anymore. Prime. You bring the weapon up above your cap box, you tee your feet. The cap box holds a percussion cap. It's either a copper or brass cap full of fulminate of mercury, which is pressure sensitive. At this point, you're ready for whatever the next command is. But for here, what we will do is shoulder, arm. Come to the shoulder. Your officers know that your weapon is loaded, ready to use either for a command of fire or a command of movement. Thank you. Now, what we're going to do next is actually demonstrate several of the typical ways that you could utilize these weapons tactically. And again, we're only doing this with a small group. You know, we're doing this with about 5 muskets. You know, a company that would fight on this field would have like 30. A full regiment would have 300. And you might be able to tell a little better what's going on if we shift down here to your left. And again, there are different ways of the officers controlling their fire. The first thing we're going to demonstrate is a company fire. You can do this with companies, regiments, and in some cases whole brigades, where everyone fires at once. This is usually done in 2 different tactical situations. Either where the enemy is out at your maximum range, 300, 400 yards, or if you come upon the enemy or the enemy comes upon you at fairly close range, and you want to try to hit them with as much firepower and cause as much damage as you can as quickly as you can.
Company, volley fire. Ready. Aim. Fire. Load.
Now again, they all fire simultaneously, and again, it can be done with bigger groups of people. The problem is, for the next 20 to 30 seconds, for whatever part of the line just fired, you now cannot produce any firepower. So what the manual trained the officers to do, and they trained the men, was different ways of altering your fire. It's a 2-rank line. You have a front rank and a rear rank. And one of the ways you could alter fire was to fire by rank, rear rank and then front rank, and alter fire so that you had at least 50% of your manpower kept in reserve to deal with whatever may change tactically.
Company, fire by rank. Rear rank. Ready. Aim. Fire. Load. Front rank. Ready. Aim. Fire. Load.
Now, we're only doing this with 5 muskets. It's not making that much noise. Imagine if it's 100 times this. Plus, you got all the other noise and chaos of battle going on. So one of the other things the manuals trained you to do was to fire by file. You have 2 ranks, and the men that stand one behind another, that's a file. So if you were going to be engaged in what looked to be continuous combat and fire against the enemy, the command would be given to fire by file. The regimental commander gives that. The right file in each company, when they say commence firing, will begin firing and go down the line. And the men will continue to load and fire at will until given the command to cease fire. And at that point, wherever they're at in the loading procedure, they complete it, bring the weapon to shoulder arms again so that they're ready for the next command of fire or command of movement.
Company, fire by file. Commence firing.
And you can imagine if we had more of a typical company for this size, for this battle, which could be, you know, more like 20 or 30 men, or if you were in some of the new units that were brought onto this field by the Federal Army, sometimes 800 brand new men in a regiment, the fire would be more continuous.
Fire.
The NCO is given the command to cease fire, so wherever they're at in the loading procedure, they will complete it, bring the weapon to shoulder arms.
Load and come to the shoulder.
We're going to demonstrate again, just firing the whole organization at once.
Company, fire by volley. Ready. Aim. Fire. Prime.
He's given the order to prime. That way they will put on just a musket cap, make sure the weapons are clear and safe to handle.
High elevation. Aim. Fire. Recover. Shoulder, arm.
Now all the weapons are now clear, and this ends the small arms, the musket firing part of the demonstration. Guys will be shifting back and prepping for the artillery firing. Now, one of the things as we demonstrated with where you fire a lot at once, again, I mentioned that we have people armed with rifles and people armed with smooth bores. The usual round issued with a smooth bore, and the standard smooth bore size in the United States Army is the .69 caliber weapon, is a single 6.80 ball and 3 double-aught buckshot to be effective at close range. But if you really had a good idea of what was going to happen, as happened in the west end of Bloody Lane where Rhodes' brigade was, most of the men in that brigade were equipped still with smoothbore muskets. They actually broke open their cartridges because they said when the Federals come over the hill, they're going to be somewhere between 80 and 100 yards away. They broke the cartridges open, put down about 1.5 pounds charge in, and 12 to 15 buckshot. So when the Federals came across the hill and started advancing toward the sunken road, they fired the entire brigade into that Federal brigade. Essentially, you walked into a wall of shotguns, and almost every man in the front rank of that Federal brigade went down. So it's an incredibly effective way of delivering a lot of fire. Now, one of the other things I mentioned, and people understand the change of going from a rifle musket from a smoothbore because your range is about 3 times as great, at least your controlled fire. The other big change that is often overlooked is the conversion to percussion ignition. What's the ignition method you have before percussion? Flintlocks. Flint hits, produces sparks, drops sparks down into the powder pan, and it fires the weapon. Well, the British Army, before they decided to convert to percussion, did testing over a period of years, both in Great Britain and in India, to see would it really be worth going to a percussion ignition system. What they discovered was, for every 1,000 firings in average weather conditions in both locations, the misfire rate with a flintlock is almost 400 per 1,000. The misfire rate with percussion ignition is just over 4 per 1,000. So not only do you have much greater range, you got a whole lot more lead flying down range than you've seen in the past. Well, the gunners are getting to their posts. I'm going to turn that part over to them. Thank you for your time and attention.
As you mentioned in the beginning, we will be firing the cannon now, so it's going to be a much bigger boom, so you may want to cover your ears. The best clue for when that's about to happen is when you hear the command ready. And once we get done with the firing, we'll have a talk similar to what we did about the infantry, about the artillery in the 10 minutes between shots.
Ceasefire!
A little louder than I thought it was going to be. You can feel the percussion of that.
Okay, a little louder, huh? Why don't we move down over here to this table? So one of the things we want to look at, it's very similar to load a cannon as to load an artillery piece. We don't really do it in 9 times. We do it in maybe 4 or 5 times because we have multiple people. So the first person, and we have our cannoneers by number, so they each got a number. So cannoneer number 1, he's got 2 things. He's got a sponge rammer. It's got a sponge rammer with a sponge on one side and a rammer on the other. So his first mission, from a safety point of view, is swab the bore down with the sponge to make sure there are no more flames in there. Because if there's flames in there and then you put a charge in, the charge could go off before you actually get it all the way seated. So that's a safety precaution. We'll talk about that a little later. At this battle, they didn't do that because they didn't have enough time for safety. Safety was not a factor in battle. But for here, that's our safety precaution. So the other thing, he's got the rammer, and the rammer then rams the charge, just like the ramrod in a rifle. Once the charge is put into the top of the barrel, he rams it to the back. So that's number 1's position. Number two has the position where he actually puts the round into the cannon barrel, into the mouth of the cannon. So his role is to get that into the cannon barrel so number 1 can ram it home. Then we've got number 3. Number 3 has got several duties. One is whenever number 1 is ramming or sponging the barrel, he has the touch hole, okay, or the vent. He blocks it so no oxygen can get in. Because the worst thing you can do is sponge it out, have the oxygen come out, and you make more embers. So he wants to make sure no oxygen comes in when he's actually sponging it. The second job he does is once the round is put all the way down, it's in a bag of gunpowder, and he has a pick, and he pokes a hole into that bag of powder. So to make sure that when the cap, or this time the friction primer, goes off, it'll actually ignite the gunpowder. The third thing he does, he helps the gunner actually aim the piece. So by tapping the side, he can then move the piece either left or right to help aim the piece. Number 4's position is he puts in the friction primer. So the friction primer, I'll show you a little bit later, is very similar to that cap on a musket. It makes the spark. But instead of having the hammer hit it, doesn't have a little hammer to hit it, he has a lanyard, and he pulls the lanyard. And so what happens on the friction primer, it's like a match on a matchbox where you get friction and then it goes off. So if everything is done properly, the cannon then will fire, right? But we got a lot of other positions on this particular cannon. We got number 5. Number 5, once again, is usually, not once again, it's once again since the 11 o'clock. He's usually one of the younger members of the crew, not our oldest member.
I'm 18.
You're 18. He's grew a lot. You know, and we won't even go there. And so the reason he's our youngest member usually is he's responsible for running the ammunition up to number 2 that actually loads it. You got to remember, the ammunition isn't light. It's 12 pounds. And running it back and forth in this heat and stuff is not something for the faint of heart. So he's responsible for getting the round up to the number 2 to load. At the box, you've got two people, number 6 and 7, so he's duplicating 6 and 7. What they're responsible is for preparing the round. The round usually has a timer charge and is a fuse. So they have to put the fuse into the round, select the right time on the fuse, and then give it to number 5, which then brings it up to number 2. The other position is the gunner. I'm the gunner position. He's responsible for aiming the cannon. So he has to know the depth and know that distance, and has pretty good depth perception. So he'll yell out the time, not the time, he yells out the distance, and there's a chart for 6 and 7 on the back that can translate the distance to that time. And that's where they cut the fuse or prepare the fuse for it to go off in that particular time. The other thing is what's missing that eats hay? Horses. Horses are really important. So when the cannons are going off, there's actually horses attached to that limber. That's called a limber with the ammunition chest. And you can see on the horses, we've got 2 people actually on the horses. So we have to have 2 people on those particular horses at all times during the battle, because they have to move the cannon. You just can't wheel that out of the way. The horses have to come up, go around, hook it on the back of that limber, and then move it out. So you have 2 people that are situated on the horses. Besides the limber, you also have a caisson with horses, and the caisson is located further back, and it has 2 ammunition chests and spare parts, wheels and some other spare parts that may be needed for this particular cannon. So of all those cannoneers, you have a chief of the piece, and the chief of the piece is actually responsible for that entire operation. So the chief of the piece tells the gunner what the round will be, and the chief of piece makes sure that the ammunition chest is always filled and actually can move stuff around. So the chief of piece is responsible for that particular cannon. In the Confederate batteries, there are 4 cannons, and the 4 cannons are usually mixed, and we'll get to mixed in a minute. In a Union battery, there are 6 cannons, and they're not mixed, they're all the same type. All right? So that's the difference between basically Union and Confederate artillery. The drill and everything else is the same. The cannons are basically the same. 5 minutes or so? 3. Oh, gotta go fast. Okay, so in terms of the ammunition that's actually used, this is a smoothbore cannon, so it uses a round projectile or cannonball. The other cannon types that were used in this battery were rifled. They're the black cannons over there. So the black cannons, you got green cannons that are supposed to be bronze, but after 150 years, they're not bronze, they're not quite bronze anymore. They fire an oblong projectile that looks very similar to the mini ball or the mini bullet in a musket. So we got several types of rounds that can be used. One is a solid shot, okay, or a bolt, and it's a solid piece of metal, and it's responsible for breaking buildings and stone walls and things like that. The other piece is called a shell, and the shell is just a hollow piece that's loaded with gunpowder, and it is designed to explode over the troops or in the woods and breaks into shrapnel, pieces that are about 2 to 3 inches, and it's responsible, for example, if the troops are in the trees, you can hit the shrapnel at the tops of the trees, knock the trees down, and kill all the troops by the trees falling off. Or if it's shrapnel, you could actually use it as an incendiary device on homes and houses that are made out of wood. Hits that, the gunpowder has some sulfur in it maybe sometimes, and it can start a fire. So it could be used for incendiary devices on buildings as well. It's also pretty good at scaring cavalry and things like that. But as you can imagine, it doesn't kill a lot of people when it only breaks into a few pieces. The killing round is basically what we call case shot. So case shot is filled with gunpowder and then has round metal, either iron or steel balls in it. And the goal there is to have this explode 20 feet above the troops and 20 feet in front of them, and then they rain down those balls on the particular troops. So what's really important is we talked about the fuses. So in these particular fuses, they've got a Borman fuse, and a Borman fuse is marked in seconds. And so if you say 800 yards, that may be 3 seconds. So you'd poke a hole at the 3-second point in that particular fuse. It's marked at 3-second piece. The gunpowder only burns 3 seconds before it sets off the charge in the round. The last piece that's sort of used at the very end, sort of as a major anti-personnel device, is canister. So canister is basically a thin piece of tin foil, and it's loaded with sawdust and mini balls, usually 69 caliber or so. It goes out of the piece, the tin foil disintegrates, and you get this gigantic shotgun blast that then goes out. Anybody watched the movie Gettysburg? Okay, during Pickett's charge, there was a scene where you saw this pink mist. Anybody remember that scene? Probably not. Yeah. That's pink mist. It's all that's left of the soldiers when they get hit with canister. There aren't even pieces left. And at a Pickett's charge, as well as here, they actually use double canister as well. So that's sort of the last round. Accuracy, you know what you're doing, and you don't have battles going on, people shooting at you, 80 degrees heat, sweating in your eyes and things like that. They can be fairly accurate. So this particular, a 12-pound smoothbore, this is what happened at 800 yards when it's shot. So they can be very accurate if you know what you're doing. Okay, the last thing is this battery we're portraying as Parker's battery that was on this particular field. Parker's battery was a fairly interesting group. It was called a boy battery, even though the mean age was in the mid-20s, like most of the troops. The reason it was a boy battery is they had a large number of soldiers that were 14 to 16-year-old. Okay, and here's some of the underage soldiers that were in the battery and pictures of them in '62. And Parker was a surgeon or a doctor in Richmond, and he delivered these kids. So he asked the parents if, when he started this particular battery, he can bring them, into battle with him, and he would take care of them. What happened is, I told you, safety wasn't really concerned, so they didn't swab it out. So one of the kids in Parker's battery actually lost his arm, when he was, trying to load it, because they didn't swab it. There was a spark, and he lost his arm. So a lot of the Parker's battery also got attacked. They had infantry coming here and some artillery coming here, but the Union also had large bore cannon across the creek. They could fire over here onto the artillery here. Parker couldn't return the fire because they had, they didn't have 20 pounders and things like that. They had smaller caliber, so they couldn't retime the infantry fire. So a lot of Parker's people got hurt. So what Parker then did is, when the battle was over, he just didn't rest like everybody else. Got on his surgeon, hat, so to speak, and then at the respawn performed the surgery for all of his soldiers as well, because he didn't want general surgeons taking care of his boys. He was taking care of his boys. So Parker, like I said, did most of their firing here. They had some, casualties. They had some loss of parts. So they went to Bloody Lane to sort of recoup. At Bloody Lane, one of the cannons, two of the cannons had to be put into action there. Then they thought everything was over. One cannon was still functioning, and it went all the way to Burnside's Hill to help a HP Hill in their attack. So Parker was involved in all parts of the battle here. One last fire, and then we can actually bring down the thing, and you can start talking to people. Okay, 600 yards, load! Ceasefire! Secure the peace! Peace is secure. So if anybody would like to actually practice loading it, they'd be more than happy to let you try. Makes a good photo op for the kids.
Always excited.
Yeah.
Did they routinely keep the cannons polished, or did they have the grades?
No, they polished them. Just like your buttons. You're supposed to polish your buttons too.
Everything say okay.
Yep.
Can you tell me what the rope is for?
The rope is in case you do have to move it by hand, you could actually hook that up there and have a couple people start pulling and trying to move it back. So one of the things they would do is fire in retreat. So what you don't see here too is when that thing goes off, it bounces back 4 or 5 feet. And so what you could do is fire it, bounce back, you could pull a little further back, fire again, and keep bouncing back. But that's for the, the soldiers to actually try to manhandle that cannon.
Yeah, you do that when the enemy is really close to you.
And your horses are shot. Then you're sometimes stuck.
I noticed you have long johns on.
We all do.
Yeah.
That was standard.
That's standard.
For not only soldiers, that was standard for the civilians.
Really? Seems like it would be so hot.
Things are different back then. I mean, it's a, you look at, even when you're plowing a field, you didn't do it in shirt sleeves. You had a vest on. You didn't go out in public, and that was public in your shirt sleeves. Didn't roll up your shirt sleeves either.
Wow.
Those are just customs that, and you had to be buttoned to the top.
Wow.
And I think today it's pretty nice. We don't have a lot of customs. Even with my dad, he couldn't be seen in public without a hat, couldn't be seen in public without a tie. I mean, sometimes it got to be a little ridiculous.
In the heat of the battle, how would you estimate how quick between rounds you think they were with these cannons?
Depends on what you're firing.
Yeah.
I mean, and where your target is. I mean, like if you've got infantry within 400 yards to you, you're going to canister.
Yeah.
And when you call canister, there's no fuse to be cut on canister. The number 7 guy gets out the other gunner's haversack, and as soon as the 5 runs a canister round up there, he's standing halfway in between the limber and the gun with the next round. So you can fire those pretty quickly, but if you're trying to judge and estimate a timed round, it takes a little more time.
Yeah.
See the tower there? Follows
Just saying, there's so many steps involved. It'd be a while before you get a second round off.
Not if you're really good.
Yeah.
And this is what these guys are doing for a living.
That's true.
And if you're firing canister and you're on it, you can get 2 rounds a minute.
Oh, easily.
Yeah, and no safety
There's
precautions.
no safety. What
Yeah.
they would do too, if they knew they were going to shoot a lot of case, let's bring 3 or 4 up and set them there.
Ah, okay.
Safety was not a concern.
Yeah.
Yeah, its effectiveness takes over. And
Cool. Okay. So the first stop is the Dunker Church. Beacon of Peace. A battle of this Antietam says it's the bloodiest one-day battle in American history. And this church, I guess, stood as a beacon of hope during that battle. And was damaged during the battle, but was rebuilt for the Civil War centennial. And now, here it is. Howdy.
Questions for me now?
Okay. So did this, because I know they said that a lot of the churches and barns and stuff also served as hospitals and stuff like that. Did this one?
Yeah, this was kind of an aid station.
Oh, okay.
Both Union and Confederate wounded were treated here. There was very serious fighting that took place
Right.
in this area. West was there. Clara Martin, they say she was down here, as well as the Union Chief Medical Officer, Letterman, who was the guy who started the concept of triage for treating injury.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Here's the monument for the Ohio 5th, 6th, 6th, and 7th Infantry. Okay. We're going to move on to the next one. Okay, the Joseph Hoffenberger Farm. It says Union General Joseph Hooker and his men spent the night here the night before the battle. First light, the Union attack advanced south from here towards Jackson's lines. And they're still growing corn here. Edge of North Woods. Okay, it says in this 24-acre cornfield saw some of U.S. history's most horrific fighting. For nearly 3 hours, Hooker and Mansfield's Union forces battled Jackson's Confederates. Many regiments on both sides were cut to pieces. Hayes, Louisiana Brigade suffered over 60% casualties in 30 minutes. It's hard to imagine such brutality took place here in such a quiet, peaceful Maryland countryside. Though the area seems so peaceful now, I can almost feel the darker side of these fields. I pulled out a K2 meter while I strolled around and observed a few areas of possible activity. I'm sure the ghosts in a place like this would find it hard to rest after the violence that took place here. It was quite surreal. It says here, as the Union soldiers stepped out of the cornfield at dawn, September 17th, 1862, Confederate troops unleashed a horrific volley. The single bloodiest day in American history had begun in earnest. For the next 4 hours, the cornfield was the center of a storm of lead, iron, and flame as Federal soldiers from the 1st and 12th Corps clashed with Lee's men. The cornfield changed hands again and again as both sides attacked and counterattacked. One soldier remembered the air seemed full of leaden missiles. Rifles are shot to pieces in the hands of soldiers. Canteens and haversacks are riddled with bullets. The dead and wounded go down in scores. More than 25,000 soldiers fought in and around the cornfield. By 9:30, thousands of them lay dead and dying. General John Bell Hood wrote, "It was here that I witnessed the most terrible clash of arms by far that's occurred during the war." See in the distance, I'll probably zoom in with the camera, but there's some cannon way out in the cornfield there. That looks like a wheat field. Got several monuments. Here's the visitor center back that way. I'm gonna walk up this way just a tad. Okay, be back. The Mama Farm says that this was the only deliberate destruction of property during the battle. As the Confederates burned this farm, they were ordered to burn this farm to prevent the structures for use by Union sharpshooters. But the family managed to escape safely. So this farmstead and cemetery were part of Samuel and Elizabeth Mumma's property in 1862. Warned of the coming battle, the Mummas and their 10 children fled to safety. Fearful of Union sharpshooters, the Confederates burned the homestead. Mama spent the winter at the Sherrick farm near Burnside Bridge and were able to rebuild in 1863. After the war, the federal government compensated residents for damage caused by Union soldiers. However, this farm was burned by Confederates, and the Mummas received no compensation. Neighbors who suffered from the war came together to rebuild their community and now rest together in this peaceful enclosure. So that's kind of interesting. So this actually became like a community cemetery as opposed to a family cemetery. Because the community came together to rebuild, this became like a community cemetery. That's a monument for the Irish Brigade. Because that's what this says right here. The GoPro died, so I'm now on my phone, so I'm not going to be as steady as we were. War Department Observation Tower. Tower was built by the War Department in 1896, part of an early development efforts by the U.S. military to create an open-air classroom at Antietam. Okay, and we have rain coming, so we're trying to hurry this along. Okay, okay, we're atop the tower. Oh, there's many others. Here's the South Mountains. And we got Frederick, other side of the mountains. 18 miles that way. Boonesboro, 6.5 miles that way. And a whole lot of rain coming from the west over there. Yeah. Okay, we're approaching the Burnside Bridge, which is over the Antietam. There's a creek there. It said here that a small brigade of 500 Confederates up on the hill there were able to hold off much larger federal troops for 3 hours before the federal troops were able to push through, get across the bridge, and push the Confederates back. And they retreated to Sharpsburg. So, a significant amount of fighting happened right here at this bridge. And there's a gorgeous, gorgeous scenery around it right now. So, we're going to take some photos and be back. Here at the Burnside Bridge, we decided to bring our trip to a close. Heavy rain was nearly upon us, but this beautiful spot was near the end of the auto tour, so it seemed a fitting place to bring it to an end. Yes, there were quite a few people here, but it did little to take away from this amazing spot. Antietam was definitely a delight. Okay, so the skies are about ready to open up on us. So we're pretty much at the end anyways, the Burnside Bridge. I think there's the actual cemetery is the last stop on this tour. But this back here is where the final attack happened in the Battle of Antietam. And if I had the time, I would check it out. This wheat field. Oh, some doves just flew off. So in this area, I don't know if these trees were here during that time. But this is where the final battle happened. So it was ultimately a Union victory. So I believe I read somewhere that they did lose Harper's Ferry. They didn't recapture Harper's Ferry after this battle. That was done at a later date. So, okay, so make our way back to the parking lot. And unfortunately, for us anyways, this is our last adventure on this year's trip to the East Coast in Maryland. Tomorrow we have to travel back to the good old state of Tennessee, and the rain is now starting. So, yeah, no, not much hiking, hardly any. But the weather was crappy here the whole week. And it's turning out to be crappy again. The rain is coming. So, until next time, I hope you enjoyed all these little crazy adventures here in Maryland, and West Virginia, and Pennsylvania, and everywhere else we went. And check out everything we've got on the channel, and our hiking videos. And the area around my parents' home here in Maryland is surrounded with history. For someone who loves exploring history almost as much as exploring a trail, there are vast opportunities to get my fix of history every time I come visit. This year's road trip was a bit more history than hiking, but I was okay with that. The time I get to spend here with my parents trumps everything else. So from our family to yours, we wish you health and happiness, and we'll see you all out on the trail.